Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Inside Out. One of the things that a lot of people use to describe a good Pixar movie is the emotion in it and how emotional it made someone while watching it. I guess it kind of makes sense. They literally make a film about emotions in this one little girl's brain. Whether it's that one part in that incinerator in Toy Story 3 or the opening of Up, there are very powerful images. And one of the main directors, one of the original Pixar brain trust, was Pete Docter. And he's finally back with his third film, his follow-up to Up. And it kind of reminds me of sitting back and watching a classic Pixar movie from their incredible run. It feels like they're back. Now, he hasn't actually been anywhere. He takes a lot longer making films than the other people in Pixar, but it feels like that return because this is a film that is about emotion. It feels more personal. It feels more intimate. It feels like all those things that a great Pixar movie should be, but at the same time, it feels like a great movie. It feels adventurous. It feels new. It feels different. And that's something you don't really expect from mainstream animation anymore. The mainstream animation has become boring. You look at something like Home, or you look at any of the previous films Pixar has been doing and all their sequels, it feels safe. It doesn't feel like how it used to be when you'd see a film like Up and you're like, I can't believe this is a hit, but I love it so much, and why wouldn't it be a hit? It feels so universal. That feeling's been gone for a while with mainstream animation. It doesn't feel like it's riskier the way when Pixar started. You're like, some of them felt universal, but you're like, I can't believe this is happening. And Inside Out comes back to that and brings you back to that, but it has all that emotion as well that makes you feel like you're really experiencing a really finely tuned, amazing, great Pixar animated movie. A girl named Riley, whose family is moving from Minnesota to San Francisco, where her dad is going to start a startup company, a technology company. But the film really takes place in Riley's mind, where her 5 emotions, joy, anger, disgust, fear, and sadness, are dictating how she should feel at certain moments. They have the control panel and they can decide if she has a happy memory or an angry memory or a joyful memory or be disgusted. And during her transition, as she has moved to San Francisco and things are getting a little more complex, they're not feeling as easy to understand as it used to be when she was a kid, especially when joy and sadness are sucked out of the headquarters, leaving disgust, anger, and fear in charge of Riley as she's trying to make her way in San Francisco and feeling very out of place and upset that she's in San Francisco instead of her home with all of her friends in Minnesota, as she feels very lost, as joy and sadness are trying to find a way back to her, so that Joy, especially, who is controlling her through most of her childhood, can come back and get her through this difficult time. Pete Docter is one of the main first few directors to come out of Pixar. He's actually the first person to direct a film at Pixar who wasn't John Lasseter, and this is his 3rd movie, and he's actually now the person who's directed the most animated films at Pixar, other than John Lasseter, who's directed more than him, I believe. He doesn't make films as frequently. His last film was Up, which was about 6 years ago. His previous film to that was Monsters, Inc., which was 9 years before that. In between Monsters, Inc. and Up, Andrew Stanton and Brad Bird actually made both of their films. He's not as prevalent as his other directors, but the one thing he does better than anybody is he's good at emotion. When you think of his 3 films, those are all 3 films I remember crying at during the theater at incredibly intense, sad moments. They're films that I remember that touched me emotionally and had an intense connection to that. And that's something Pete Docter does better than any of his peers. Pixar is really an auteur animation studio, more so than any big studio animation company is in America. And DreamWorks has its share of auteurs, but Pixar really made its name doing that. And Pete Docter is really continuing that tradition of those auteurs like Andrew Stanton, like Brad Bird, and Lasseter himself. The thing that's interesting about this film is it's so creative, it's so weird, it's so different. It's literally a film about emotions. I mean, that's kind of abstract and strange, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels very big and Hollywood and really well constructed and like you can follow it. And I think that's the thing about Pete Docter is like each of his movies, before I go in, I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna work, but hey, I'll go with it. I like Pixar. More so than Stanton or Brad Bird or any of the other guys. And this is probably his strangest film to date, but it doesn't feel like a strange movie. It felt very easy to get. All the kids in the audience were into it. And that's something that I really like about certain kids films, certain animated films, when you can kind of sneak something in there that people really wouldn't normally see. I don't think people would normally see a film like this, but because the brand of Pixar they'll go in, but them enjoying it and the storytelling that's put in place there. They spent a lot of time just figuring out how to crack this story and how to tell this story, and that really shows throughout how well built the storytelling is in this film and how it cares so much about emotion. It's so dumb to say emotion when you're reviewing this film, but it's so true. It's like it cares about emotion, but it feels large. It feels like a blockbuster. People are always talking about stakes, and stakes are too high and ridiculous, but the stakes in this are so easily understood. It feels bigger than attacking a giant robot who's going to destroy the world or dinosaurs or anything like that. It feels so much more important. This is about a girl, this is an 11-year-old girl, and she's trying to really kind of understand that like things aren't as black and white, and you have to kind of restructure. And during that time, you kind of have a transition time in your youth where you aren't the best to deal with, where you are angry for no reason, where you don't really know what you're doing. And that's really what this film is about. But instead of making a small independent movie about a girl being introspective and thinking about herself, that's the genius of what Pixar does, is they make a really big movie about these people going through the memory banks and trying to find their way through these bizarre situations they've made up. And that's something I loved about Pixar films. There's so many times I've watched them, and for a second I forget I'm watching a big movie. And that's something that's always made me look at Pixar, that's something more than just the big movie that's out right now, because it just feels more intimate. It feels more personal. I remember that scene in The Incredibles where the parents are fighting, and then when they stop and they talk to the kids, I felt very emotional at that moment. I feel that way in this film, and I love that about Pixar when they're really good at what they're doing. I love that you can really feel that emotion. You can feel like you're in it. It feels very personal and intimate, but it can still feel very big. You see these big islands of her personality falling and being destroyed and being ruined, but it's really saying something emotionally. And that they can both do both of those things, it kind of makes it even more impactful, because it feels very unique, but it also feels very personal and reaches and says something to you. This is kind of a shocking reminder of like, hey, we used to be what everyone thought of as the return to classic Disney. We were that fucking good. Everybody thought we were the unique, amazing studio that could do no wrong, and it really felt that way. I've seen them all in the theaters, and I remember leaving and thinking like, oh man, that's another one I would put on my top Pixar list. Like, that kept happening every summer in the mid to late 2000s. And I'm not gonna say I can rank this film among the other Pixar films. Those are classics, and I don't want to try to rank those movies. It's also that when I did that, each of those films, there was a new one every year, so it didn't feel like I'd had this gap of time to really attach myself to those various films. At this point, it reminds me of that feeling of feeling like challenged, of feeling emotionally connected to, of feeling thrilled, of like crying in a theater, which I haven't done in forever. It felt like an amazing, great, what movies are made to do kind of experience. And that's something that I love about Pixar, but I love having that experience again, and that they didn't completely forget about it. When you look at these big animation studios, this is probably their most different kind of challenging film, and Pete Docter deserves that. He won an Oscar for Up. Up was the first Pixar film nominated for Best Picture. It was the second animated film ever to be nominated for Best Picture, and so he got rewarded with this. And it's kind of cool when you think about his peers. Andrew Sand and Brad Bird went on to make live action films, and Pete Docter stayed, and he made this, and he made the challenging, strange, weird movie that's not actually challenging and strange to take in as an audience. It's kind of like when you get to be an auteur, you make your stranger, weirder movie after you're able to have that money, and this is his, but it doesn't feel that way. That's the best thing about it. It feels like an amazing Hollywood kind of Pixar, grabs you, pulls at your heartstrings kind of film. But also, because it's about a little girl, that is really what it's about. And that's what makes it so important and impactful. Not because it's about a girl, it could be about anyone, but because of what it does with just such essential little elements. It uses the power of animation to do that, and it uses it in such an amazing way. Honestly, it feels weird even talking about it, because it's like I haven't seen such a good Pixar movie and not seen it 4 or 5 times before I even want to talk to someone about it. It's so complex in what it's doing, but it's also so simple. It like simpled down the complexity in a way that it makes itself such a unique and like strong, complex vision, but it brings it down to kids, but it's not talking down to them either. There's a lot of tightropes this film's walking, and it could easily fall into like nonsense, that was interesting kind of movie land, but it's not. Saying that was interesting is not giving this film the service it deserves. This is an amazing masterpiece. masterpiece of an animated film by one of our great animation directors living today. People forget about Pete Docter. I don't hear his name brought up enough, but they could do something like this. I think you should really stand up and recognize, how did this guy get this to work? Because it just seems like the ballsiest idea Pixar's ever had, but when you're watching it, it doesn't feel that way, and that's an amazing thing to watch. The cast, or at least the English language cast, is really great, and I think Amy Poehler and Phyllis Smith do a great job as Joy and Sadness. Amy Poehler is just great as Joy. She's kind of doing even happier Leslie Knope in a lot of ways, but that's kind of also how Pixar casts. They cast people who they know can do a particular role, and she does her full Amy Poehlerness in this, but she also does an amazing performance in this film. And I think she really got into Joy, but understood the various complexities to Joy. I really like Phyllis Smith as Sadness, who's probably most known for playing Phyllis on The Office. She's kind of that supporting actor who really pulls everything together that you could honestly underappreciate. The interesting thing about what her and Amy Poehler are doing is Amy Poehler, her performance is so overreaching as Joy, and she's so joyful that you honestly feel like she could be doing all the heavy lifting, but Phyllis Smith is like doing a lot of things that you're not really recognizing. Without her, this film wouldn't work as well as it does. She's just very good at this mopey character. There's a lot to be said about the chemistry of two actors, because a lot of times actors don't get to record lines together, and I know even for when they recorded lines for this film they didn't, but there was an actual chemistry between them. It's funny is Pixar's very good at having chemistry between their two actors who are doing the voice roles in their films, and I think that's another example of this in this film. Bill Hader and Louis Black and Mindy Kaling are also really great. Also, Kyle MacLachlan as the dad and Diane Lane as the mom, which I didn't even realize it was Diane Lane, so kudos to her, I guess. Also, Richard Kind, I think, probably is the performance you'll be talking about the most, is Bing Bong. He really steals the movie for me. Probably the more quotable lines of this film are performed by him, and the emotions he brings to those lines are really what sells it and makes you care about those lines. He just had this vaudeville sense to him. The emotion he brought, the richness to his emotion he brought to that performance, made me tear up quite a bit just by his performance. Also, the cartoon return to Paula Poundstone I really like. She has a small role, but it was nice. Another thing I really like about this film is the color and how vivid it is, and particularly the character designs. I particularly like Joy. Kind of reminds me of like a Gerald McBoing Boing, like a UPA kind of character design. She does kind of look like Gerald McBoing Boing. She doesn't act like Gerald McBoing Boing, obviously. If you know UPA, I kind of feel a little bit of that influence in here. Not entirely. I sometimes think I overstate UPA influence in things, but I could see that in the character design of Joy, particularly the eyes. A lot of the characters in this film felt like they're almost designed by different people, kind of showing a more richness and emotion. It had such a unique look to it, but it really felt very colorful and bright, and took advantage of the brightness and the color that animation can really use, more so than I can think of a lot of films. It really looked gorgeous. It's good for Pixar to be back, and I love that Pixar is back, and I love that the auteurism to Pixar is back, which I honestly haven't really seen since like Toy Story 3. It reminds me of why I fell in love with Pixar, but it reminds me not just that, and I think there's going to be a lot of talk of like Pixar is back, and it certainly is. It just reminds me of what I liked about the movies and what I liked about animation and how film can surprise me. When I talk about the great films of the era when Pixar was at its peak, I'd always consider it part of like great films and great storytelling, and I think Inside Out feeds into that more than I've seen a Pixar film do in so long. It's cool to see somebody back, but it's also nice to see one of my favorite animation directors of this era, Pete Docter, come back. It's a really fully formed, creative, and unique film that tugged at my heartstrings, made me feel in a way I don't think a lot of movies have, and entertained me and made me laugh in just the way you want a great movie to do. And I think Inside Out reached inside out of me and brought something that I love about the movies all over again, just the way those classic Pixar movies did. And for that, I'm incredibly thankful and kind of gleeful that we have this kind of a thing, and that people can experience this and have this rich kind of filmmaking, not just on, you know, a personal independent level, but that this kind of a film can be brought to everyone and everyone can experience this richness. And that's just an amazing thing that I love to experience as a moviegoer. I think Pixar brings out things in you that you kind of forgot the movies could do, and it makes me not just love animation again and Pixar, but love going to the movies. And I think that's one of the great things that Pixar does, is it makes you believe in all that corporate schmaltz in an intimate way and care about character. And that's just a beautiful thing. And I think Inside Out reminds me of how unique they can be, how wonderful they can be, but why I loved all this crap in the first place. And I think that's pretty cool. So if you have seen Inside Out and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments, and subscribe if you would like to.